And that's the thing. I think that when you remove any sort of transcendent understanding of man, you necessarily degrade him. And that's what we've really done.
Hello and welcome to Catholic Unscripted. I'm Katherine Bennett and I'm usually joined by Mark Lambert, but he can't be here today. We have conversations about the faith and about the world through the lens of our Catholic faith. And joining me in conversation today is Sarah Cain. Some of you may recognise her as Crusader Gal and her Homefront Crusade. You're very welcome, Sarah.
Thank you. I'm really glad to join you. I love what you do. And so I feel really, really privileged to be here.
Oh, well, likewise. I've been following you online for a number of years and dip in and out as far as possible, keep up to date with what you're doing. Actually what we're going to talk about is quietening the noise. So it's impossible to keep up with everything. But what brought you to have an online presence, Sarah?
Frustration, mostly. Perhaps I shouldn't say that, but it's true. It is the fact that I was there probably around the 2016 election and all that kind of cycle, and people were being censored left and right, especially people of a more conservative persuasion. And then I posted this thing on X. Back then it was called Twitter, and it was criticizing Islam for its treatment of women especially. And I was contrasting that with the way that the political left in America seems to try and join with them. And it was just kind of an amusing point. And I got banned from Twitter for that. And so that kind of propelled me. Like, some people, I think, get frustrated and they just kind of close off. And I'm more the person who'll move forwards and say, if you try to silence me, I'll just sort of move into, further into the media, further into this public sphere. And then also there were a lot of people that would talk politically, especially about cultural issues. And I kept feeling like they were leaving things out. They were being omissive, perhaps intentionally sometimes, but most of the time just because they thought differently, and we're different people, and that's kind of how that works. And so I got in there with a YouTube channel and all of that, and started to put some of my own opinions out. And what was interesting, I think, is that in doing so, I was politically conservative, but I wasn't yet Catholic. And in doing those videos, like, I've always wanted to be the person, if I'm going to speak publicly, I want to know about which I speak. Like, I don't want to misinform people, including through my own ignorance. And so I was studying the history of the West in order to give better, theses, to be able to speak more clearly. And it was in that study that I found the faith. Like, this, I think it's that whole famous quote of, to be rich in history is to cease to be Protestant. That was my experience, was that it became very clear to me that while no particular part of history has ever been a utopia and never will be, at the same time, you can see that the Catholic Church, as a beacon of light, guiding the world and the culture back repeatedly from one area to the next. And when you see a source of consistency like that, I mean, it's really inhuman, and that is what becomes very easy to see and difficult to miss. And so that led me into the faith. And so now, in the present day, I exist more in the Catholic sphere than in the purely political. I think because as you embrace the faith, you become more distrusting of political institutions to fix things that are inherently spiritual.
And did you start off with was your channel called Homefront Crusade? Were you always Crusader Gal, I should say, not girl, Gal?
No, it's funny. I did start with my own name, with Sarah Cain. The Crusader Gal imagery and slogan actually came before I was Catholic, which is really funny because I was already Christian. I was baptized Anglican when I was 15. But what I saw about the Crusades that I tried to remind people of, these were men who were willing to die for the faith. And here we are, in post-modernity, and we have this very sort of tepid understanding of what it means to be Christian. We almost understand what it is to be Christian, at least on the cultural level, through almost a looking glass understanding, that we understand what it is to be Christian through the eyes of those who don't hold the faith, but tell us how it is we're supposed to, act as Christians. I find it maddening when you have somebody who's on the left and says, well, you know what Christ said? He said, judge not. And then that's the only quote that they know from the entire, bulk of scripture. And so
add that to something Pope Francis said on a plane once, and you've got the whole canon of Catholic.
Exactly. Yes. And so that was just maddening to me. And so the image of the Crusader, I thought, was a really helpful, just visual reminder of it is not the case that throughout the history of Christendom that people have just stood back and refused to fight about anything, refused to stand for Christ, refused to stand for the truth, refused to speak. And we really are in an era where you have so much, cowardice. I don't know how else to put it. I think it was Saint John Bosco who said that the cowardice is the main source of our problems. And it's like, well, yeah, because if you look around, and I think that kind of continues more to our day, it really is something that we should be fighting against.
Yeah. And you're now, to add to all that you do, you're now producer and co-host of the morning show at the Station of the Cross Catholic Media with but certainly your paths cross with our mutual friend, Father Robert McTague.
Yes, I was his producer for quite a while, a little over a year. And then I ended up becoming a co-host of Rise Right. So we're on the air at 7 a.m. Every morning Eastern time. And so then we're kind of following the news of the day, quite literally, and putting that into a Catholic perspective alongside my co-host, Jake Kraft. So that's a lot of fun. But yes, working with Father McTague is always a joy. And his show, The Catholic Current, is consistently top tier.
Yeah, he's very good. We've had him in conversation a few times. He's just so clear, isn't he? There's something so refreshing and much needed about that. Is we've had lots of ambiguity, lots of wishy-washiness, lots of trying not to offend. And then he booms in 20 minutes, addresses something, and you're like, okay, that's clear.
Right. And he was such a huge part of what helped me to see the truth of the Catholic faith. So it was 2020 and I was already, producing videos on the conservative political stuff, and COVID hit. And so I'm talking about the COVID lockdowns and how basically disastrous they are for humanity, not COVID itself, but the actual lockdowns and all these different abridgments upon especially religion. And I was talking about the Catholic faith, and specifically, like, well, if the Catholics, believe in their own sacraments, why are they closing the churches? And it was at that particular time that Father McTague on the Catholic Current had me on his show. So he's probably the first Catholic that I was in touch with at any point, to specifically speak about what was going on, what was going wrong. And he agreed with my criticisms. And so we had that conversation, and it was really refreshing to find someone who spoke as honestly and openly, and he wasn't, apologetic for the bureaucracy of the church. Like, he could just kind of admit, there's things that shouldn't be happening here, while still defending the truth of the faith. And that's an important distinction, and he's never really shirked away from that. And I've always appreciated that about him.
And that's wonderful to hear from you as a convert, because what brought you in wasn't the things that we're often told will bring people into the church, which is to compromise a little, to maybe, be a little unclear, to meet people where they are, but not really take them anywhere, to be nice, to play football, to eat pizza. It was actually, I've heard you speak about the rigidity, but this is obvious. This is often used pejoratively, but you said actually that's a good thing. You want that rock, don't you?
Exactly. I think that we need it. It is part of, the human heart has to rely upon something, and we're designed for it. And in a time of such vast relativism, we need that contrast. We need a foundation. I think we search for it. It's Augustine's thing of we're being restless until we're resting in the Lord. And that's what we're kind of coming to. And I think that as someone who was just kind of a generic Christian for most of my life, I was raised atheist, and then I had that baptism at 15 to Anglicanism, but I just kind of lived in this sort of, very common, I guess I'm Christian, but I'm not really doing anything about it kind of a way. And so you live in a culturally Christian society, and you're like, well, what does that mean? because it means that we have some relics of Christendom that remain, and they're kind of being crumbled and assaulted throughout time. But moreover, what is it that's fulfilling us? I think that everybody asks that question, like, what is the point of my life, ultimately? And these sort of more extreme questions plague everyone to some degree. What am I doing here and why? Because there is no secular answer for it that is fulfilling. There's nothing, in the secular world, in the atheistic world, that says, oh, well, you have this massive path. It's the pursuit of happiness and the avoidance of pain is about as good as it gets. And I think that ultimately that becomes vacuous. And especially in contrast with all of the different scandals and crises that are happening in our world, the simple avoidance of pain and pursuit of happiness don't provide enough. We find ourselves kind of empty. And I think that there is this desire for something concrete. And what the church provides is this connection between present and past, and obviously God reigning now. And so it's that we're missing. And that connection with ancestry, I think that's so important, because we see, in the reverence of the Mass, or when done so, we see these connections to our forebears that I think have been eliminated in cultural reference. So like, while that speaks to the human heart, what you have seen in English and American culture is a downplaying of one's past, such that there aren't really any heroes anymore. Like we would have in antiquity, would have talked about Godfrey of Bouillon or something like that. We'd talk about these massive heroes. In American history, you would have talked more about the founders, and you still kind of see some of that in a glorified fashion. But over time, the statues are getting taken down. And you see that as well in English history, was there was some advocacy of the spread of civilization and the spread of law and so on. And that too has been pulled back and is now labeled as something of shame. But I think there is an inherent need to be connected with one's ancestry and with the good. But all of our heroes have been taken away. And there's something that's sort of left there seeking that foundation.
Yeah, wonderfully put. You said we sort of recognize this desire for something concrete, but that's only if we give ourselves the space to sort of notice that. We're distracted, aren't we, so often by moving images, by constant noise. And you're absolutely right, our hearts are restless until they find rest in God. But I think in many ways it's an intentional attempt to draw us away from recognizing that sense within us. And that's in fact why I've asked you to join me in conversation today, because you wrote a beautiful article just shortly before Easter called Turn Off the Noise, Light a Candle. And this can be found on Sarah's Substack, Homefront Crusade, which I'll link below. But I read that and I thought that's so beautiful. And it's increasingly something that we, Mark and I, have been talking about, is that we recognize the need as the noise whips around us to really step back. Do you want to tell us about what inspired you to write that article and a little more about it?
Yeah, of course. I wrote the article because I've become aware of this contrast of the needs of my soul with the realities that I experience in the world. And I think that it's not a unique experience, which is to say that maybe you've experienced this, but when there's like a power outage, but it's brief, so it's just a few hours and the power goes out, and there's this sort of like conflicted thought. You're like, well, I kind of need the refrigerator to work, I need things to not go bad. But also there's this sense also that's like, well, I guess I don't have to work right now. I guess I don't have to be responsive right now. I can just kind of enjoy, what I mean? There's this mix. And I think that indicates something that is broken, because it's not the case that I want to go without lighting or without refrigeration or really without modern conveniences. But I do think that there is something very unnatural about just how frenetic our environment is, how in touch we are with the news cycle, and how available we are at every single minute to those around us, which in and of themselves don't seem too bad. But think about how different they are with the experiences that would have been the case throughout the majority of human history. The sense that you can't really get away from anything because you're always tied to notifications on your phone. Like if you put your phone in a different room, you might catch yourself doing something. You'll look around for it and you'll go to reach it. And then you'll realize you don't actually have any need to reach it. It's not even beeping, but you like compulsively reach for it to see if somebody's seeking your attention, if someone's seeking your input, if someone's seeking, in a certain sense, your output, just to say, your constant production of your thoughts, of your values, of your opinions, of your jokes, whatever it is. And that a social media world is entirely built upon that concept. But I think that there's no chance to pray. There's no chance to be alone with God. And we've built a society around this understanding that the best thing, the only thing is connectedness, to each other, to the corporate world. And I think there's a cost that we're not fully aware of. So if you work in media, as I know you do, Katherine, you end up having to stay very aware of what's going on in the world, whether it's the church world or news, more broadly, whatever it is. Like you just have to stay in touch, and that takes a toll. Yeah. It takes a toll on your soul, ultimately, to stay informed. And so what I do is I try and either go to daily mass every day or try to go to make a holy hour if I can't make the mass because of work. And when you start doing that, I think you become way more aware of the contrast. Yes. You start to yearn for what hitherto that point you didn't realize you were missing, because you don't experience it. We grew up in this world, and we haven't experienced the point in which we would be unavailable, in which things would be just quiet and you be alone with your thoughts and with God. It's just not part of the modern human experience, even though it was very normal. Not to say there's ever been a perfect period, but just that if a certain amount of aloneness and quiet and stillness was the human experience throughout, well, forever, until the last half century, then, maybe we can learn something from there, because the goods of antiquity are still the goods of today. And so as you start doing this, as you start spending this intentional time alone or in prayer, in quiet, you start realizing just how loud the world is and how much it demands from us in terms of our constant output.
Absolutely. Well, I'm a lot older than you, Sarah, so I'm a child of the 70s. So I definitely remember power outages in the 80s and what life was like. And before the phone, so much has changed with the onset of the internet and the phone. And I'm very fortunate in that I didn't grow up with one. I do use one, and I do depend now on, as you say, keeping abreast of the news and what's going on in the world. But many of my happiest memories are baking with my mum, with my granny, playing with my cousins, riding bikes and scratching my knee, and all those things that that really was how we lived. I think for some young people now, we say, "Why, this is what life was like," and they can't even imagine it.
Yeah,
30-year-olds can't imagine that.
Well, I'm a millennial. I'm sort of the last generation that didn't grow up with a smartphone. They did kind of come around when I was, in my very early 20s. But I'm so relieved that I wasn't part of that generation where in my early teens or as an actual child that I wasn't there with a smartphone, and where I had the same memories that you have of riding bikes and trying to use a skateboard and failing and just all these things with friends out in the streets and being called by someone yelling. It's a very different. And so even in that, you're much less, approachable, reachable than we expect that everybody is now. Right? It's just an entirely different scope of human existence, where there is a silence about you, an unreachableness to you that you were as a child, as being part of that generation, which also overlaps with mine in the sense that we're pre-smartphone or pre-expectation that an 8-year-old would have a phone, right? Well, which has become increasingly normal. Yeah. And so, but now we're training people at such a young age. And I think it's also horrific in the sense that I I can't imagine what videos and photos I would have produced at these ages, doing stupid, reckless things and saying stupid things that I wouldn't want to exist forever. And yet we put that responsibility on these children, knowing that we wouldn't have wanted that ourselves.
I know. And what's interesting, Sarah, I've noticed is, I'm sure our parents were worried. I remember my mum worrying about things, but it seems like, along with the greater checks we can make, we can monitor our children, we can put Apple tags on them, we can see what they're doing. We've got CCTV everywhere. We've got cameras watching us. Everyone knows everyone's business. So in some ways, you're more traceable, and yet we're more worried than we ever were, compared to the days when we were out, riding our bikes, and our mums used to go, Katherine, where are you? And just wait for the return at some point, and just that. So that's it's kind of a paradox, isn't it? That the more we monitor, the more worried we are, not the less.
Well, exactly. And I think that we're all experiencing this, whether it's direct worry or whether it's just the kind of constant anxiety that comes from the flurry of the news. So we're all aware about everything that happens, including things that happen on the other side of the world. Like, did you hear about the suicide bombers in Algeria 2 days ago? Well, yeah, but like, should I have? and that's the thing, because I wouldn't have at a certain point, and I'm not sure that it's good for me to be constantly aware of every negative thing and very few positive things in contrast, because that's the thing. We're being we're subject to a sort of onslaught on the personal level of all the different meltdowns that might be happening in our social life and social world. And then also on the more political level, as it's broad, and we're being told essentially that we should be panicked about everything, that we should be outraged about everything. And, then you're supposed to express your outrage. That's what social media exists for, to express the outrage about things that you probably shouldn't have a ton of outrage about, because it's just a different part of the world and you didn't know those people and you never will, and that's the harshness of our current society, is that it doesn't leave any room for our loves and for our silence. And you have to wonder, one of the things that Ignatius of Loyola would often talk about is, if you're at the end of your life, like imagine yourself on your deathbed and think about whether or not you would regret the current decision that you're making. How would you make this decision differently if you were there? And I was thinking about that in terms of how phonetically we live our lives. And like, would you say, I wish I followed the news cycle a little closer, or that I got more worked up about this story when most likely you forgot about it by the next day? And so I do think we have to be intentional. There's something ironic in the fact that we have to plan for periods of silence, like, because our worlds are so active and so very planned and everything's going on all the time, that if we actually want to do this, if we actually want to spend that time that's alone, as I really recommend that everyone does, like I said, making a holy hour or a mass is great, whatever it is, or even just, as I talked about in that article, just sitting there by candlelight and just, having that time away from everything, like turn the phone off and just think and pray and be and just feel that stillness that people probably haven't felt for at least years, but you have to be intentional. It's not just going to happen to you. Instead, the distractions are going to happen to you, right? And you're going to respond to them. And so that's what we ought to be doing. Instead of taking the time to sort of analyze our own past and what's coming up, we live in this kind of frenetic middle, dealing with the crisis one day at a time. I'm just not sure that's the way that we're supposed to live.
Yeah, absolutely. There's another thing that you mentioned that resonated with me, because it's something I've been thinking about, which is letter writing.
Yes.
I'm a big letter writer, and I love the art of writing letters. And my father and I write to one another. I wrote to my mother-in-law before she died, and a friend who was going through chemotherapy and couldn't write back. I just sent her letters, and after she finished, about 6 months later, I had no word from her. She said those letters kept me going, and my daughters now write to their friends, They're only in their teens, and I think that's lovely that they're a
It
little letter
is.
will arrive, through the post to my daughter. And I want to encourage that, because it's very easy for these things to slip away if we don't continue, especially with technology and AI. It's easy to outsource everything and write emails. And why wouldn't you write an email? It's quick, it's easy, but it's not always about what's quick and easy, is it?
Right. Yeah, and that comes down to the fact that communication has become so fast that we have neglected the fact that it demands our time, right? And that's one of those strange contradictions, because it is so easy to contact people that we think that we have the capacity to just maintain this kind of contact. But I think that what we end up doing is losing the closeness that would have been there, because instead everything's short and brief and sort of matter of fact, and we're trying to accomplish something. I think a lot of our relationships have been reduced to the need to accomplish a certain task, and so they become almost businesslike, and that's a real loss, to go from this element of loves to reducing every relationship that we actually have. And so we do that when we're just like, oh, you send a quick email and you're like, oh, here's this link, go check it out. And you compare that to if you were to write a letter to somebody, hey, I discovered this story today and it touched me in this way, and you kind of break that down as to why it touched the person, or why it reminded me of you, and why I thought to send it to you. There's an entirely different dynamic between these two things. Can you technically do that in an email? Yes. Do people do that in an email? Absolutely not. Because with the potential for haste comes this desire to use that so we can use our time, better. But I don't really think it is better. And I do think that when you look around at the examples of human relationships right now, how many people have friends? And it seems like a strange question, but like especially younger generations, we have work colleagues and we have families. And the work colleagues we kind of think of as friends, but then the moment we move to a different, job, that they're gone. And so most people nowadays, especially those who don't have active parishes that they're part of, don't have friends. And it's a crucial loss that's there that I think very few people really think about.
Yes, it's true. It's a reduction to utility and, as you say, accomplishing something, output. Is it any wonder then that we see moves to bring in euthanasia and assisted suicide? Because if you are reduced to what you can deliver and you're no longer able to deliver anything, you're useless, then why bother?
Yeah. Oh, you see that at the beginning of life and the end of life. So we see that with abortion as well, in the sense that if they're not wanted at this particular time because the woman wants a career, and that's the same argument, and that is one of the arguments that's being made. Well, I'm in college and going toward this career, and this child will change my life. The word is usually ruin my life, but that's not true. The child will change.
Sex, but yeah,
right. Yeah. And so you got that at the beginning of life where you're saying, well, the child is going to interrupt the utility that I have planned. And then at the end of life, you have somebody who is no longer outputting to society. And that's the thing. I think when you remove any sort of transcendent understanding of man, you necessarily degrade him. And that's what we've really done, is we've entirely divorced man from his relationship to God. And because of that, we find ourselves going, well, at that point, man is just, what can he produce for us, for the collective, or he's constantly in the pursuit of finding happiness and avoiding pain. And so if that's the entirety of the human experience, then right there at the end of life, well, he's just suffering. There's no utility in suffering according to the secular worldview. And so it's, well, you might as well turn him off, because he really is reduced to a machine. Certainly indistinct from one on a philosophical basis and the philosophy of the New Age. I think that's what we're really experiencing. And then after that, so you now have this carcass, this dead human body, and we're going, well, what can you do with that? And you have the people who are like pushing for human composting, because they're going, well, I want to do something with this body because it's waste. And how can we make use of it? And it's this very same argument being extended all the way through from the moment of conception, when they're like, well, do we want this thing? Is it really useful to us? All the way till after death, when we're going, well, what can we do with this body?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Sarah, having talked about the importance of peace, I'm going to end by talking about something very noisy with you. Your people listening may have picked up a little twang there in your accent. You are well placed as an English-born woman who has lived in America for probably more of your life than you lived in England.
That's right.
But we can still hear it, Sarah. We can.
I'm very glad. I've never been told I have a twang before. I'm a little bit unnerved. I'm going to have to work on
I don't know. I don't even know what twang is. I was just reaching there. But
okay. All right.
Yeah, you sound English, but with a twist. There we go. Twist is better than twang, right?
It does feel like I don't fit in anywhere anymore, because I'm here in North Carolina on the East Coast, and they have a pretty distinguished accent, and so I always sound foreign to them. And then if I speak to somebody back in England, I definitely don't sound like I'm from Sheffield anymore. So
that's what's wonderful about being a Catholic, is that's where you fit.
Yeah,
it doesn't matter about anything else. So the noise that I'm speaking about, and you're well placed to comment on it for our viewers both in England and America, is what's been going on with Trump and his messaging over the last few days. Yeah. And I have been shocked, and perhaps this is as an English woman, so let's get your take on this. I've been shocked at the number of American Catholics who have come out after some of Trump's posts, including saying Pope Leo's weak, and then pictures of him as healing Jesus, as in a healing Jesus or a healing Christ figure. Yeah. On the side of Trump, you know, bashing Pope Leo, saying we've got to be loyal to the USA, not the Vatican. And I'm thinking, this sounds very much like England 1534, you know, if you ask. So what's going on with that?
Yeah, I am horrified as well. And I've found myself, you know, like if I have to put myself in a political camp, I do lean on the conservative side. Mm-hmm. But when I looked at the post by President Trump, it was, I mean, honestly indefensible. Mm. So you look at those and you're like, well, he's attacking Pope Leo for wanting peace. You know, like, what do you think that the Pope is going to do? Go, yes, you know, go bomb them. You know, what are you expecting there? Followed by that blasphemous picture of himself as Christ, which he later tried to pull back and say that he thought that he was a doctor. And I mean, maybe doctors see themselves that way, perhaps. But kind of ludicrous. Yes, I agree with you, though. When it comes to Catholics and even if you're not Catholic, I just think you ought to be able to just look at that and say, you know what, that's wrong. Like this really isn't a complicated thing, or shouldn't be. But when I was on X, and I looked at Bishop Barron's statement where he basically said, you know, Trump should apologize to Pope Leo. That was, you know, out of control in terms of messaging. And he was very even-handed in his message. And I looked at the comments underneath, and one after the other was saying, well, you just want Iran to have nukes. And it was just this complete misunderstanding is the charitable word that I can use for this, you know, but it really did dodge the issue entirely, refuse to be critical of Trump at all. And again, you know, I'm someone who leans toward that way, who considers myself, you know, traditionalist, which is usually, you know, more aligned with the conservative side. But I'm not sycophantic of President Trump, and he's also not my God. And he presented himself as a deity in one of those images. And if you want to say it's just a meme, well, fine. But it's a problematic one. Can we admit that he shouldn't be doing that he shouldn't be presenting himself as a deity? I mean, when so many people on the right for so long, and rightly so, have said that the problem with communist regimes is that they elevate the state to a condition of deity. When we acknowledge that, and we point to North Korea and we point to China as, you know, having these attributes, we should also look at our own and say, okay, that's wrong. And I think there's something seriously wrong with any political movement that's unwilling to point out human error. And really, somebody who's in a political posture needs, I should say, that correction. And he's been better than some politicians in regards to stuff like this in the past. So this was his first term. And I actually got a lot of heat for this, which is kind of funny in retrospect. But he put out his support for red flag gun laws. And in so doing, he said we should take the guns first and due process later. Now, that was the quote that he delivered. And there were people saying that he never said that. And we actually have it on video, right? So I used to play this clip over and over again because people would just repeatedly come up in the chat that he never said that. You know, it's this big thing. But he received a lot of criticism from his own base. Like his base was sort of split on the issue. Either he can't have meant that, didn't mean that, you know, or he did mean that. And that's a problematic thing. When he saw the fact that he got so much correction or criticism from his own base, he pulled back, moved away from red flag laws, and stopped promoting them. And that makes him different from a lot of politicians who are unwilling to ever roll anything back. But this is one of those things where if a person is human and they're in a position of vast power, they need correction when they do something that is wrong. Like, it's not the case that we should just constantly applaud someone because we prefer them to be in power versus someone else. Because when I was talking about this recently on air, the specific thing in regards to Pope Leo, there was people saying, well, would you have preferred to have President Harris? Like, that's not the question. You know, you can't see everything that President Trump does and say, well, it's good compared to what we would have gotten. You have to evaluate what's right. And as Catholics especially, that's what we're called to do, to say, is this right or is this wrong? Not, hey, is this better than what she would have done? Like, it's such a debased version of political analysis to do that.
Yeah. In your position as a English woman living in America, is there something in the American psyche, as far as you can see, that explains this? Because I can't imagine anyone over here, no matter whether they're Conservative supporting or Labour supporting, going to the wall in defence of Keir Starmer, Rishi Sunak, Boris Johnson. I mean, it's my sense that we're just not as he's my guy, even if we voted for somebody. Is that quite an American thing in your view?
I think it's more of a Trumpian thing. So,
it's Trump.
Like,
okay.
So if you looked at the political saga prior to Trump, I don't think you had such a separation or such, I don't know, love. I hate using that word in this context, of a political figure. But, you know, you had the regular figures that we've had, the Cheneys and the Bushes that were there. And everybody was kind of tepid, like, yeah, we'll vote for this person because we don't really like the Democrat policies, and they argued over tax rates and these kind of smaller things. And then President Trump comes in, or then candidate Trump comes in, and he starts saying these much more wild things, right? And he starts really energizing large blocks of people, especially the disenfranchised. So a huge portion of President Trump's base are people who were not politically motivated before, but suddenly saw themselves represented in a public figure. And I do think that resulted in an entirely different political understanding and political attachment than is normal inside of America. Yeah.
Yeah, he does seem to be, you know, people seem to be either never Trump or always Trump. You know, there isn't. It doesn't seem to me, at least, that there are many who take a view of. There
are some of us.
Done. Yeah, I know there are.
But you're right. You are right. There are very few people, it seems, who are just willing to take the good and point out the good and lambast the bad. That is very. I mean, and he, you know, if you go to one of his rallies or something, there's a momentum there that doesn't surround other political figures. It really doesn't.
Yeah, there's no doubt he's got something. What it is, we don't know, but he's got something. You said a beautiful line. Perhaps we'll finish with this in your video on becoming a Catholic. I know you've said you don't especially like focusing on your own personal life and you want to keep the issues forefront. But in that video, you said, my politics doesn't lead the way, my faith does. And if there was a conflict, I'd adjust my political views to be in alignment with my faith. And I thought you just expressed succinctly, I think, the right attitude, which is, yes, you said you lean slightly towards the conservative or Republican side. You and I both don't like using those terms left and right. It's always up. It's always up. But where over in this country, the Labour Party has left us, the left has gone so far that even if you were left leaning 20 years ago, you'd be far right now. So it's not hugely useful to use those terms. But I thought that was lovely. That's a really nice way to express it, Sarah.
Thank you. And I do think that's the way that we ought to be, because, and for those who kind of miss it, because the faith is true, right? And so that's the reason that our politics has to come secondary, because it has to align itself to that which is true. And that's what we do when we move it into its proper place like that, where because otherwise you're just parroting falsehood, right? And so by putting our faith first, that's what we do. We place Christ as head, and therefore we place the truth as head. And so if our political opinions align with that, then we're just trying to move in a positive direction, because that's all you can do. When you're moving away from the truth, you're going to have a disordered society. And I think we've seen a lot of that, and we're still going to see that going forward. But in order to understand where we ought to be politically, we all have to have a grounding. I think it's said that theologically, we can never choose an evil. Instead, we legitimize and find miniature goods, lesser goods in all things. And so when we look at different political figures, including tyrants of the past who killed millions of people, and you look at them, and if you read their rhetoric, you can find out what legitimization they use, what tactics they used, not only to convince others, but to convince themselves of their own rightness, of their own goodness. And so if you remember that these monsters of history are also, reflected in us in a certain sense. We all have the malevolence that runs through one's heart. And so to correct that, we have to have some external source of truth that's going to weigh in and is going to say what it is that we ought to be doing, how then we ought to live. And that's where the faith comes in and grounds us and provides that contrast and prevents us from just rationalizing away as we commit grand evils.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, I've really enjoyed this conversation, Sarah, and I hope you'll come back and join us again when Mark can join us too and have another conversation. There's so much we could speak about.
I'd love to.
So we'll hopefully talk with you soon.
All right, thank you.
Do please visit our own website, catholicunscripted.com, and pick up a subscription if you're able to, because then you can support us having more great conversations like this. And take a look at the links below, and you can find Sarah's article there and many others on her Substack. And if you're in Eastern time, check out her morning show. Don't do it in the UK, or if you do it afternoon. But
yes,
it can be found online. So God bless all of you. Thanks for watching, and thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.